Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the media. My name is Masimba. I am the director of the United Nations Information Center based in Pretoria. I will be your moderator today. First of all, I would like to welcome you to our press conference on the events in southern Mozambique. The aim of today's press conference is to share with the media the recent visit to Mozambique by United Nations regional directors for Eastern and Southern Africa. Their visit was meant to assess the plight of displaced people and host communities in the province of Cabo Delgado. Mozambique is currently facing a dire humanitarian and food security situation in the northern part of the country, brought about by the escalating violence and the displacement of more than 500,000 people from Cabo Delgado. Today, we have a distinguished panel of speakers to tell us about their visit. Each speaker will have only 5 minutes of remarks so that we have enough time for questions and answers. First, we will have opening remarks from Mr. Allan Kwenin, Regional Director for Southern Africa of International Organization for Migration. This will be followed by messages from other country directors for Eastern and Southern Africa. After the messages, we will have a Q&A session with our media partners. Journalists are welcome to send their questions through the chat box. You can pose your questions in English, Portuguese, or French. I just want to remind you that this press conference is being recorded. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Mr. Kwenin, the current Regional Director for Southern Africa for the International Organization for Migration, or IOM, to give us the opening remarks. Ms. Kwenin has been very instrumental in launching the IGAD regional consultative process, the Migration Dialogue for Central Africa, and the Migration Dialogue for COMESA. In coordination with the African Union and the regional economic communities, Ms. Kwenin has been one of the key architects of the Pan-African Forum on Migration. Prior to his appointment, Ms. Kwenin served as the Senior Regional Advisor for Africa in the Office of the Director General of IOM in Geneva. He also served in Addis Ababa as the IOM. He also served in Addis Ababa as the IOM Chief of Mission to Ethiopia and the IOM representative to the African Union and the Economic Commission for Africa, as well as IGAD, among other senior positions he has held. Over to you, Mr. Kwenin.
Good morning, colleagues and members of the press, and thank you very much for this press conference. The deteriorating situation and condition in Cabo Delgado, the UN Regional Directors for Eastern and Southern Africa had a scoping mission to Cabo Delgado. The mission was represented by 6 agencies, that is WFP, UNFPA, UNDP, FAO, UNHCR, IFAD, and IOM, representing all the regional directors in the spirit of delivering as one. The purpose of the scoping mission to Cabo Delgado was essentially to express our concern about the deteriorating situation in Cabo Delgado, and also to express our solidarity with the people and government of Mozambique, and especially those affected communities and the IDPs. At the same time, to see what is being done, what has been done, and what needs to be done, so that the UN can mobilize our assets to scale up the support for the government and the IDPs and the host communities. IOM has a wide footprint in Cabo Delgado, present in 16 of the 17 districts in Cabo Delgado. and has huge a number of activities in support of the IDPs, host communities, and the government. Notable among these is the displacement tracking matrix, where IOM undertakes assessment of the number of people that have been displaced for planning and budgeting purposes to assist in the humanitarian delivery of food and non-food items, which are normally used by the state and non-state actors and the UN team. IOM also leads the cluster on camp coordination and camp management, and also shelter, working close collaboration with all the other agencies to support the host communities and the IDPs. It is also very important to know that during the visit, the team met with the Secretary of State of Cabo Delgado and the Governor of Cabo Delgado, and in Maputo met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And during the visit in Cabo Delgado, we agreed to undertake registration of the IDPs, a comprehensive registration to be led by IOM and WFP, working in close collaboration with all the other agencies, which we find very important. So at the end of the mission, we had a meeting with the Minister for Foreign Affairs to agree on some of the activities that needs to be undertaken, which will be discussed by the other colleagues, which we think is very important, especially addressing human rights issues, issues of livelihood and shelter, and at the same time, minimizing the suffering of the IDPs and host communities, because the situation, as we found over there, was very deplorable, very disturbing, and we wanted to let the world know, and the community and development partners, to put the issue of Cabo Delgado on the forefront of the discourse and to advocate for more support to the government of Mozambique, and especially the people who have been affected and suffering to the limited access to some of the communities, especially the coastal areas that have been affected by these attacks. So we thank you for giving us this opportunity to brief you on this, and we are ready and available to respond to any questions, and I'll call on the other colleagues to provide us with what they observed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kwenin, and thank you for setting the tone in terms of time management. Our next speaker is Mrs. Lola Castro. She is the World Food Programme's Regional Director for Southern Africa and the Indian Ocean states. Ms. Castro has spent a professional career working in the international humanitarian and development fields. She joined WFP in 1994 and has served in several senior positions that include as Deputy Country Director in Malawi, Country Director in Georgia and Armenia, Representative and Country Director in Mozambique, Representative and Country Director in Pakistan, and Deputy Director before assuming a current position in 2008. A national of Spain, Ms. Castro holds a Master's in Development and Cooperation from the Spanish Agents for International Cooperation in Madrid, among other academic qualifications. Over to you, Ms. Castro.
Thank you very much, Charles. Good morning, bon dia, bonjour to all the present journalists and colleagues. Charles, as Charles have said, our mission to Cabo Delgado was critical and timed in a moment in December where the situation of the number of displaced populations was increasing as we were visiting the location. I will focus on the food security and nutrition aspects of our mission, and our colleagues from FAO and IFAD will contribute to that as well, as we were together there. During our visit, we visited the districts of Ankwabe and Chure, as well as the Josina Machel and Paquitekeke areas of Pemba City. What we saw really was very alarming, as our colleague Charles have introduced. We saw a huge amount of displaced women, children, and men in a very dire situation. We saw children, women, and men sharing one house, 56 people. They had been hosted by a host community. We saw settlements in the rural areas, which they have been relocated to. But in these settlements, the conditions were still being upgraded as we were visiting. The situation of food security and undernutrition has clearly deteriorated when we see the numbers. The numbers when in 2017 we were asked to come and support the initial displays, there were 5,000 people displaced. At the beginning of 2020, we had 18,000 people displaced. At the end of 2020, we had almost 500,000 people displaced and host communities. And the situation is just very overwhelming for everybody. While the government, the international community, the civil society, and the host communities have done a great job together with the UN contributing in the country, we really do believe that what we saw, women and children with signals of undernutrition and heavy parasites with very big stomachs. We saw also the need to ensure that the food that is distributed reaches to everybody all the time, every month, because this is the only means of feeding at this moment. Due to the difficulties, the humanitarian distributions are at this moment being scaled up, and we managed in November, December to reach around 400,000 people. However, the nutritional condition is really deteriorating. We could see ourselves signals of moderate acute malnutrition, and even some cases of severe acute malnutrition of children that were evacuated to hospitals while we were visiting. Very sad situation for women and children, and very difficult, especially the water. The water also requires much more distribution. The access is there, but it has to be upgraded as we are speaking. So to ensure the utilization of the food. And we also require to increase the nutritional interventions, because with the incoming rainy season, we also very clearly that where the population was sitting is in areas that will be flooded, and also the areas that will be affected by the traditional cholera and other emergency outbreaks, epidemic outbreaks in the region, in the province that we know happen every year. So looking at that, what it was very clear for us as regional directors who came to support our resident coordinator and the UN team in the country, as well as to discuss with government, civil society, and the communities, is that we need to immediately and urgently increase our interventions there. On food security and nutrition, we need to augment and manage to reach everybody every month and ensure that all the children and women who are undernourished, pregnant and not pregnant women, they need to really receive supplements, and that is a very urgent discussion that we had during our visit. I think also, just to end, wanted to say that we have launched before the end of our mission, the government of Mozambique, together with the UN country team, launched the humanitarian response plan. And that humanitarian response plan appealed for 136 million for food security and 50 million for nutrition interventions. And those are critical. And it's not only about food, it's also about seeds, about fisheries, and also to enhance and ensure the livelihoods of these people, especially the ones resettled, are really sustainable. And they don't need to depend day on day and month on month on humanitarian. But at this moment, the humanitarian is essential. And at this moment, for welfare program only, we are looking at $11 million per month to be able to feed all this population. Anyway, I will leave it here. And thank you very much for your attention. We will reply to the questions as they come.
Thank you very much, Ms. Castro. We will now hear from Ms. Julitta Onabanjo, the Regional Director for Eastern and Southern Africa of the Fund, UNFPA. Ms. Onabanjo is over 2 decades of insight and wisdom on matters pertaining to the sexual reproductive health and rights and empowerment of women and young people throughout Africa. She has worked in the field as program specialist in Swaziland and Kenya, and went on to serve at UNFPA headquarters as technical advisor, and later as special assistant to the executive director. More recently, she has held UNFPA representative posts in Tanzania and South Africa. Mrs. Onabanjo holds a medical doctor degree from the University of Zambia and a master's degree in public health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, among other academic qualifications. Over to you, Mrs. Onabanjo.
Thank you, Masimba. Distinguished media representative, colleagues, really good morning and a warm New Year's greetings. Let me join Lola and Charles to again stress the dire, really heartbreaking humanitarian situation that we saw firsthand during our mission. Let me also say that we did hear very harrowing stories of families fleeing from their homes and arriving in these resettlement areas and with host communities with literally nothing on their backs. But we also saw some truly humbling and inspiring demonstrations of solidarity, hospitality, generosity, and resilience. And I think that's what has given us really, I think we took away really a very strong sense that we need to be doing more, and this needs to be an issue that requires global attention. Allow me to focus on three aspects that we paid specific attention to. One is the health, with a specific focus on health in pregnant women and children. One is the issues of protection, but really from a gender equality lens. And the last will be on education. It was clear to us the Cabo Delgado conflict and the cyclone Kenneth that happened a year before it, and overlaid with the COVID pandemic, had greatly disrupted the health system and led really to displacement, not only of people, but the healthcare workers, and really had also left really systems, health infrastructure that had been either destroyed or were partially functioned. So we saw, you know, a third of the current health facilities across the province are either closed down or partially functioning, and really are unable to offer the basic health services such as antenatal care, child welfare, immunization, and just the basic needs. So this had put really the health of women, and especially pregnant women and children, at high risk. And Lola described the issues around, you know, severe nutritional deficiencies. And indeed, we did see firsthand an infant boy who was being cared by a family member where his mother had been displaced and separated from him. But you could see definitely the need for admission into hospitals. And so there's, you know, you see that visibly. I think we were also cognizant of the rains that were approaching and the sanitation issues and just the density of the population that had moved, but also that we're living particularly with host communities. We did find a family that was hosting 8 other families, a total of about 80 people in a very small place. And so the chances of communicable diseases were extremely high. Of more than the 500,000 displaced by the conflict, half of that are women, and around 120,000 are in that age of reproductive, or what we call the reproductive age cycle. So they're 15 to 45. We estimated that there were about 1,000 pregnant women who were expected to deliver. So they were in their last trimester in the months that we visited. Many of those were really young girls who had teen pregnancies. And indeed, Cabo Delgado, even before the conflict, had not only a high level of child marriage, but also of teen pregnancy. So 2 out of every 5 young girls had delivered a child before the age of 18. And so really ensuring the timely and the basic continuity of basic health services and really sexual and reproductive health is really life-saving in these circumstances. And indeed, the partners had mobilized to establish within these resettlement centers, and we saw them, mobile health services, including mobile brigades and mobile clinics, really just trying to ensure that, you know, the population that has been displaced can get access to these services. In relation to protection, and indeed, the words of an elderly woman in the resettlement camp stayed with us. She said, "Our future here in this camp and in this site begins with simple things." Many of the displaced population had arrived with no possessions. The women were looking for the basic clothing, for them, sanitary wares, whether it was menstrual pads, and in addition to food and the water and the livelihoods that Lola spoke to. And typically in these emergency settings, women bear the unequal burden, and indeed violence, particularly sexual violence and abuse, tends to be exacerbated. So in the context of, again, looking at the healthcare of these women, but also looking at psychosocial support, because indeed coping and trying to heal with what they had, the ordeal they had gone through, was key. And so in the sites that we visited, I think, again, due to support from the UN system and particularly UNFPA, we had established women and girl-friendly spaces, and nearly 6,500 women and girls had received some sort of psychosocial support. In addition, we are looking at mechanisms to ensure that if there is violence, justice can be served. But I do want to also stress that women were also extremely resilient and at the front line of rebuilding not only their lives and their host families, but also in really wanting to be part of a process that looked at the conflict and looked at peace and security. Indeed, in the districts we went, the leadership was led by female councillors and commissioners. And finally, on education. I think by all communities, parents, there was this need that young people, and particularly school-going aged children who were out of school, needed to get back into the school system of some form. COVID had led to a national school closure policy. So in the settlements, that was not being put priority on. Indeed, as we know, Africa is a very youthful population, Mozambique and Cabo Delgado including. And for us to really ensure that the capital that we need to keep economies developing, we need to invest in young people and particularly in education. And so I think one of the things we committed to, particularly with our colleagues in UNICEF and UNESCO, was to really look at innovative ways ensuring that we can get education to young children, especially early education, but also to continue to look at adolescents and youth and to see how they can get and continue the education they need. So with this, I really wish to conclude by highlighting that, the cost if we fail to provide health protection and education is going to be dire. Lola mentioned how much is being put in the humanitarian response plan, which was about over 540 million is what we're requesting for education, health, and protection. We're looking for $36 million, 10.5 million for health, 20.6 million for education, for protection, and 5.2 million for education. I'm really glad that we can have this conversation with the press today. Indeed, the urgency is now to get things moving and to really ensure that the people of Cabo Delgado have the quality of life, the justice and the dignity that they deserve. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Onabanjo. The next speaker on our list is Mr. Patrice Talla, the Sub-Regional Coordinator for Southern Africa and the representative of the Food and Agriculture Organization in Zimbabwe. Ms. Talla joined FAO headquarters in 2001 as the legal officer in the Law and Development Service of the Legal Office. In 2004, he was transferred to the World Bank in Washington, D.C. as the legal officer in the Environment and International Law Unit of the Legal Department. Later, he was appointed as the FAO representative in Madagascar and consequently in Comoros, Mauritius, and Seychelles. A national of Cameroon, Ms. Talla holds, among other academic qualifications, a Doctor of Philosophy in International Law and Public Law from the University of Limoges in France. Over to you, Mr. Talla.
Thank you, Masimba. Good morning again, colleagues, and a happy new year to everyone. As my colleagues mentioned before me, it was really a heartbreaking situation that we all saw during our recent mission in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado region. I will not come back again on what Lola mentioned regarding the food security and nutrition, the situation there. But what I will say was that that situation has completely destroyed the livelihoods of this population, given that most of them were farmers, fishermen, and they have all left what they had behind. And we could all imagine the situation they are living, not only not be able to do their usual activities, but really to rely on food assistance. As Lola mentioned, it's really important that we continue providing food assistance to these populations, but at the same time, they all mentioned to us that they all want to go back to do what they used to do. They all want to continue their agricultural activities, they all want to continue fishing. And so we were able, during our meetings with the local authorities, we really convey this willingness, this resilience attitude of the populations who want to go back to their own activities. So they want to continue cultivating. So we discussed with the local authorities the possibility of getting available lands for these populations, given that where they are today, they will not be there for a few weeks or few months. They might be there for several years, which means they really need to start cultivating. So the local authorities promised that they were trying to look for lands that they would make available for these populations to start cultivating. In the meantime, FAO started providing to this population the seeds for different crops, so that as soon as they get the lands, they can start cultivating. We also find that in the areas where they are currently displaced, they may also start doing some livestock activities. So it will be important to see how we can provide them with input for them to start doing some livestock activities. At the same time, we found that in these areas it will be very important to have some small-scale irrigation schemes. So I think, and this is an area where FAO and IFAD could work together to see how to provide some irrigation activities in those areas. The same for those who were used to do fishing. So it's important to provide those input for them to do fishing. What FAO is currently doing, we are currently providing, I say, the inputs and providing some seeds for this population. At the same time, we as one of the output of the missions, we developed a 3-year program where we'll try to really to provide those support these populations in collaboration with other UN institutions for them to go back really to recover their activities. So this is really a few things that I could mention here, saying that we are really looking forward to the collaboration that we will have with all other UN institutions to provide the support to these populations. At the same time, as you know, it's important that to mobilize the resources. So the dialogue and discussions with the development partners, with the financial institutions is important so that we can have the financial resources that are needed for these activities to be undertaken. At the same time, continue also the discussion with the government, for the government also to provide the necessary resources that they are able to provide for these populations. So which means it's really an urgent situation that we saw in Cabo Delgado. There is no time to waste. We need to act as soon as possible and to have really an integrated approach where we have at the same time all the social aspects, including education, health, and agriculture, but also looking at the short-term and long-term vision for this population. I will stop here and thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takukam. We will now hear from Mr. Valentin Tapsoba, the Director of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, Regional Bureau for Southern Africa. His bureau covers 11 countries in the region and the Indian Ocean island countries. He has worked with UNHCR for the past 26 years in various leadership positions at both the Geneva headquarters and several field operations in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. Ms. Tapsoba served in Burundi as the Deputy Representative in charge of operations and as representative in Sierra Leone before being appointed as the regional representative for UNHCR in West Africa. He also served as the UNHCR representative in Ethiopia and as the director for the Regional Bureau for Africa. A national of Burkina Faso, Ms. Tapsoba holds a master's degree in economics from Ouagadougou University and a master's degree in international transactions from George Mason University in the United States. You have the floor, Ms. Tapsoba.
Thank you so much, Masimba, and good morning to all of you. Happy New Year. I must say that the situation in Cabo Delgado is dire. It is a humanitarian and protection crisis where human rights abuses on civilians occur every day. The international community cannot let this situation continue like that. I must say, Masimba, that you did mention 26 years with UNHCR. I have seldomly been exposed to such desolation, heard so many tales of violence, and seen so many scared looks. The situation in Cabo Delgado is appalling, and if nothing is done soon, we won't have only 535,000 displaced people, but several thousand. We won't have only 2,000 people killed by the conflict, but 10 of thousands. The people we met had to leave everything behind them, their homes, their land, their animals, their meager resources, even their identity document as they were fleeing for their lives. The situation keeps deteriorating. The number of displaced people is increasing every day, and we all need to act more and now if we want to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe. UNHCR has had a presence in Cabo Delgado since November 2019 with an office in Pemba and a long-established presence in Nampula province for the refugee response. Our teams keeps growing, and as this month, we have been able to assist more than 17,000 displaced people with shelter material and essential items such as blankets, mattresses, cooking sets, and planning to assist at least 160,000 people in 2021. Giving the protection and psychosocial needs, UNHCR also support community initiative and conduct protection monitoring in both IDP and host communities. We plan to assist 10 or 1,000 more people this year, provided we get sufficient funding and access to displacement areas. The situation in Cabo Delgado is above all a protection crisis where human rights abuses against civilians occur daily. When we were in Cabo Delgado last month, we were shocked to hear first and horrendous stories of abuses on families. Many people said their houses had been looted and burned down, their sources of livelihood destroyed. These brutal attacks happen in the context of extreme poverty and inequalities, with many parents unable to send their kids to school or feed their children, nor offer a roof over their head. The level of insecurity is having a dangerous psychological impact on men, women, and children who consistently fear they can be attacked at any moment. The situation is dire. We are therefore increasing the number of staff directly working with the community to document human rights abuses and initiate activities to replace the loss of livelihood. We visited also in Nanja settlement, women who were grateful for our assistance, but who shared their frustration for lack of food and lack of water. You gave us buckets. One lady was saying that you gave us bucket, but there is no water. So it means that we need definitely to scale up. The lack of civil documents is also compelling issue. Many people left ID document behind them, fleeing for their life. UNHCR has set up legal clinics to help those people in their quest to recover an identity through new documents. Without them, it is impossible to get a job, send your children to school, or start a new life. I am worried about the wandering children and teenagers. I think Julitta said it also. I saw in the settlement I visited in Akwaba and Mutuj districts. They are not going to school, and if nothing is done, Mozambique will definitely inherit a lost generation. It is urgent to make sure the displaced children can access education. One young teenage boy I talked to said that he is struggling to project himself in the future and to make plans. Here again, we need to work together with UNICEF, UNESCO, other education organizations and the government to ensure a more positive future for the young people who are victims of violence and displacement. Shelter remains a worrying preoccupation. 90% of the IDP stay with host families who did not hesitate to open their homes to family members, friends, or even to complete strangers fleeing violence. But those daily host families are now confronted with even more limited resources and space issues. We visited a family in Pemba who was hosting 66 people. IDPs were accommodated in one room, sleeping on the floor and sharing only one latrine. Women and children were exposed to promiscuity and illness, including COVID-19, as you can imagine, in such a confined and crowded environment. Finally, we also need to make sure we get full access to help the IDPs and that any bureaucracy slowing down the delivery of assistance is lifted. We presently have a 16-truck full of assistance stuck at the border between Tanzania and Maputo since the 23rd of December. I will conclude by saying that in addition to assisting IDPs, UNHCR is also providing international protection to some more than 28,000 refugees and asylum seekers based in Nampula province. And we would like definitely to rely on you, the media, to report on the dramatic situation in the province. I stop here, Masimba. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tapsoba. Our next speaker is Mrs. Alessandra Casazza, who is the manager of UNDP's Resilience Hub in Nairobi. She has over 20 years of experience working with the UNDP at the country, the regional and global level, and with the private sector, both in New Zealand and in her home country, Italy. She has served with the UNDP as an advisor in the regional offices of Addis Ababa and Bangkok, and at the country level in Sri Lanka and Timor-Leste. Prior to joining UNDP, Ms. Casazza worked for KPMG in Italy as auditor and advisor on corporate social responsibility and business ethics. Ms. Casazza is a Master of Science degree in Development Economics from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, among other qualifications. Ms. Casazza, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good morning and bon dia to everyone in this call. I will address the press from the long-term development angle of the crisis in Cabo Delgado. And I would like to begin by saying that UNDP has been very pleased to be part of this very important mission. UNDP, as you know, has a long history of working with the government of Mozambique to provide long-term development solutions to its people. And we are at this very important moment during this crisis very committed to contribute to address the crisis. You have heard from my colleagues that we have traveled to Cabo Delgado and we have had the opportunity to meet with the people, particularly those that have been forced to leave their homes because of the violence, that have taken refuge in other parts of Cabo Delgado and resettled, particularly in Chure, Ankwabe, and Pemba. These are the areas that we have been able to visit. We have also been able to speak with the host community. And in our discussions, we have been able to hear about their plight and the challenges that these people have been facing at this very difficult time. I want to say that during our visit, we could witness that this crisis is really unfolding on 3 different fronts. This is together a humanitarian crisis, this is a security crisis, and this is also a development crisis, which requires urgent action and investment in all these 3 fronts concomitantly. We need to respond to the humanitarian crisis. We need to support the government to restore the security situation in Cabo Delgado. And we need to also provide support to invest in long-term development solutions. What we have seen during our visit in Cabo Delgado is also that this is not a crisis that is confined to Cabo Delgado only. This spans across the border with Mozambique and, with Tanzania and Malawi. This is a crisis that has cross-border dimensions. It requires support for strengthening cooperation amongst the bordering countries, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Malawi, particularly to bring long-term development in border areas. This means investing in cross-border trade, promoting access to social infrastructure, to social services, building governance institutions, promoting social cohesion, and generating particularly economic opportunities for these communities in borderland areas to prosper. What we have found in our work in UNDP is that extremist and armed groups really thrive in border areas where there is a development and an institutional vacuum, and therefore bringing development, long-term development solutions in these remote places would really reduce the opportunities for the recruitment and the support to these armed groups. What I would like to say is that UNDP remains very committed to work under the leadership of the UN resident coordinator and very closely with the UN country team in Mozambique to support the government to respond to this crisis. We see that we can contribute in three key priority areas. The first priority area for UNDP is that of continuing supporting the displaced populations to recover from the crisis and to integrate within the host community. We will continue supporting this community to access basic social services and livelihood opportunities. What we have seen is that there are no indication, at least for the moment, that the people that have fled their homes, that had to leave their homes because of the violence and resettle in other parts of Cabo Delgado will be able to return to their places of birth anytime soon, not in the near future. And we see that it is very critical. It's very important that we, as the United Nations and UNDP, support the integration of these people within their host community, the local community that have offered hospitality to these people, to the displaced. This means ensuring that they have access to social infrastructure, to basic services. It is important that we promote access to jobs, to livelihood opportunities, safe housing. And very importantly, it is also critical that we support the peaceful and harmonious coexistence of the displaced population with their host communities. The second priority where we will invest our resources is that of promoting cross-border cooperation and investment in long-term development in borderlands. UNDP is currently working with the government of Mozambique and very closely with our colleagues in WFP and also IOM and other parts of the UN system and development partners to promote cross-border cooperation to lay the foundations for long-term development in the areas bordering Mozambique and Tanzania. This for us means investing in social cohesion, in preventing the further spreading of violent extremism. We will invest in strengthening local governments and access to services, basic services, access to justice and the protection of human rights, and also the promotion of economic development in border areas for these communities to prosper. Our third area of priority is that of building resilience of people and institutions in the northern part of Mozambique, including Cabo Delgado. UNDP is currently working with partners, the World Bank and the African Development Bank, to support the government in the development of a new strategy for resilience and development in the north. We are committed to build on the work that we have done in the aftermath of cyclones Idai and Kenneth, and to continue working with the rest of the UN system and development partners to build the resilience of the people in the north, to recover from this crisis, but also to transform its economy, the economy in the north, and the institutions of the state. For us, building resilience means investing in long-term development. That means stability, social cohesion. It means ensuring access to renewable and affordable energy for the people living in the north part of Mozambique, social infrastructure, basic services, access to housing, governance, and particularly access to economic opportunities and prosperity. In concluding, I would like just to mention that UNDP is committed to leverage all its assets at the country, at the regional, at the global level to support the government of Mozambique to respond to this crisis. I want to mention we have recently established and opened the Africa Borderlands Center and the Resilience Hub here in Nairobi. We bring knowledge and expertise on how to invest in development in borderlands and also on how to build resilience. And we would like to, of course, offer these assets to the government of Mozambique and to the rest of the UN system to respond to this crisis more effectively and efficiently. We are concerned about the situation in Cabo Delgado, and we are committed to do our part to contribute to the response, to address the root causes of the crisis and to promote long-term development. I want to mention that our approach to addressing this crisis is founded on the principle of human development, which puts people really at the center of what we do, empowering people, expanding their opportunities and choices to live the life that they choose. This is in line with the SDGs, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the African Union 2063 Agenda for the Africa we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Casazza. Finally, we will hear from Mrs. Sara Mbago-Nhunu, who is the Director for East and Southern Africa Division of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. Ms. Mbago-Nhunu brings to IFAD rich work experience spanning more than 20 years in the agriculture sector across in Africa. She has also led and managed in other development organizations in the design of development projects and capacity building programs. Prior to joining IFAD, Ms. Mbago-Nhunu worked at the World Bank as a senior agricultural economist for the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Republic of Congo. Ms. Mbago-Nhunu holds, among others, a master's degree in business administration from Maastricht School of Management in the Netherlands. You have the floor, Ms. Mbago-Nhunu.
Good morning, colleagues and members of the press. Thank you, Mr. Masimba, for your moderation as well of this very important session and debriefing event. As the last presenter in this forum, I just want to echo the sentiments of urgency and responsibility as expressed by Dr. Julitta, Charles, Lola, and Patrice this morning. The International Fund for Agricultural Development expresses solidarity with the government of the people of Mozambique to the loss of lives and the displacement of 500,000 persons due to the attacks and instability in Cabo Delgado, which has created a serious humanitarian crisis, even in the wakes of the cyclones Idai and Kenneth. So just to reiterate, we continue and are committed to support smallholder farmers specifically in other vulnerable groups that are at the mercy of what is ongoing in Cabo Delgado to essentially reinforce economic and social resilience, support the recovery of their assets and economic base, and rebuild their lives in a sustainable manner. IFAD supports to Mozambique is fully aligned with the government's vision to promote sustainable economic growth, productivity, and job creation by unlocking the productive potential in the Mozambican economy, both in the blue economy and the wider rural economy. We know that this is completely aligned with the rural development strategy that has been laid out. And in that, we want to be sure that IFAD financing really reaches the most vulnerable and the most poor, targeting in all of its operations 50% women and 30% youth, because that's where the transformation will happen. To address and safeguard and rebuild livelihoods hardest hit by the triple crisis of climate, COVID-19, and conflict, IFAD has been able to mobilize $85 million to allocate to approximately 314,000 households across Mozambique under the IFAD current financing cycle, which ends the end of this year. 80% of this financing is grant resources. Approximately 40 million of that resource is going to be invested over the course of this and the next couple of years in 3 operations that seek to reach 55,000 households in the northern Cabo Delgado zone and neighboring provinces. We are looking at fishery and aquaculture investment, known as PRODAPE, PROCAVA, which is unlocking wealth in several value chains and trying to support young people to access those and women opportunities in those, and support to the financial sector through the RIFIP program. In addition to this, because these resources are not necessarily enough, IFAD is partnering with the Green Climate Fund to mobilize and unlock a further 50 million to try and meet the important ambition of creating opportunities of state sustainability. We know for equitable and inclusive sustainable growth in the country, promoting rural connectivity, mobility, and investing in infrastructure, basic infrastructure for those of which the people of Cabo Delgado now do not have access, is absolutely important. Building and laying the ground for the crowding in of sustainable investments, to partner with the private sector to create temporary jobs, to rebuild productive capacities, foster stabilization and recovery of the zone is absolutely and imperatively urgent. We also know that the disruptions created by the COVID-19 pandemic has left many smallholder farmers unable to actually plant for the next cropping season, as Patrice and others have already mentioned. So it is absolutely imperative to try to get these resources into that zone as quickly as possible. We know that 25% of Mozambican gross domestic product is reliant on agriculture, but only receives 5% of the investment. We want this to change. We also know that about 420,000 young people are being introduced to the labor market each year, and only 18,000 new jobs are currently being created with the current structure of the economy, and we must really change this. The Nacala, Beira, and Maputo corridors are essential not only for Mozambique, as has already been mentioned, but 4 out of the 6 neighboring countries are relying on those ports as conduits to global markets, and we must support this. So there is a big financing gap for the Mozambican economy, particularly in Cabo Delgado, to reach its ambitions to stabilize and create sustainable jobs that give alternatives to rural communities. IFAD in its financing cycle for IFAD 12 is ambitious. It's trying to mobilize the 3.8 billion program of work, which will total 11.1, with a specific focus on enhanced adaptation of smallholder agricultural program that is going to crowd in the needed adaptation and mitigation capacities against climate, which is essential for Mozambique and other countries. In addition, we have a private sector financing program that is ready to partner and support and work directly with the private sector to crowd in those needed investments. This is an ambitious move. IFAD would like to actually mobilize 40% more resources than it has done in its former financing cycle. And this is absolutely important if it is going to be able to support and work together with the wider UN family in meeting our goals for peace, stability, and recovery and sustainable development that is much needed across the northern part of Mozambique. I want to close by also stating that in the area, in order to arrive at joint work, at joint programming, collaboration through all stakeholders is absolutely key. And this can only be done in partnership and listening to local communities, the local authorities who define and have a very clear ambition for transformation of rural economy and agriculture, and building on what they have in terms of their ambitions for unlocking the wealth in fish and agriculture and livestock will be the starting point of all this. Thank you, Masimba and all colleagues. I know in the interest of time, I would just like to stop there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mbago-Nhunu. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for questions in English, Portuguese, or French. Please feel free to write your questions in the chat box. Before you ask your question, we kindly request that you state your name, your organization, or the media house and the country you are based in. I am mindful of the time, and I do apologize for running behind the scheduled time. We will continue for a while to give more time for questions from the press. The first question I have right now is from Andrew Meldrum of the Associated Press, based in Johannesburg, and is directed towards UNHCR. The question is, are displaced populations dispersed around Cabo Delgado, or are they being housed in camps? Are they able to grow their own food? Are they able to get healthcare, clean water, schooling, and other essential services? Over to you, Ms. Tapsoba.
Yes, thank you so much. No, what we have visited, the government has come up with sites, identified sites, so that the IDP, the internally displaced people, could be moved to those sites. But what we have seen also is that there were boreholes, but it was not enough water for everybody. And this is why we are saying that definitely before even moving people from place A to B, we have to have at least the minimum. We know that we are in an emergency situation, but the minimum, you cannot just move people and dump them where you don't have the minimum services for them. In terms of food, I may ask Patrice to complement, but we have been taken to farms where the government has given plots to the IDPs so that they could farm, and we had seen cassava plantation and so forth that they have started because now it is the rainy season. This is what I can say. But in terms of health, we have seen, for example, UNFPA had set up tents and so forth so that people could at least get the minimum services in terms of healthcare. Food, Lola said it. We had also interviewed some people who were telling us that they have only 1 meal per day, and they eat in the afternoon. When they eat in the afternoon, they have to wait for the next day to get something to eat. Over to you, Masimba.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tapsoba. The next question I have is from Peter Fabricius of the Daily Maverick. See any evidence that the insurgents are allowing or encouraging non-economic activities such as farming in the areas they control, for example, around Mozambique, Daprai? Maybe we could ask IFAD or FAO to respond to the question.
Good. Sorry, Masimba, I didn't hear very well the question. It was the connection was not very good.
Okay, here's the question again. Did you see any evidence that the insurgents are allowing or encouraging normal activities such as farming in the areas they control? For example, around Mozambique, Daprai?
I thank you for the question. I think it would be difficult for us to answer directly to that question because we did not have access to those areas that are controlled by insurgents. Our mission was in the cities, in the areas where the IDPs are currently settled, and what is sure is that if they have left their villages is because they were not able to continue doing their activities. They could not continue doing the farming because of the situation or the security situations happening in that region. Because I mean, think that if they were able, if the security was ensured, they were preferred to stay in their villages and continue the activities. So it's really an issue of security, which really push those populations to leave the area. Also, to the to come back to the question that was raised before, what the IDPs are really requesting is the capacity for them, the possibility for them to be able to continue agricultural activities in where they are. But this also demands that they should be able to access to land, and this is an issue. So, which means that the national and local authorities should be able to provide them the land on which they can start cultivating. But I think it's also important to mention here that the solidarity of the population of the hosting communities who are already, some of them are already giving to the IDPs their lands. And I think this really shows the solidarity that the hosting communities are really providing to those so that they can start cultivating. And as earlier mentioned, they can either do agriculture but also do livestock activities. So this is what I can say for now. Thank you.
Just to complement Patrice Masimba, I want to add the fact that in our COVID response, we have put together a joint program which is addressing 10,000 households with approximately 6 million in resource to access small seeds, inputs, so that both the internally displaced persons and their host communities can start cultivation. And so this would be a very important call to really insist and call for access to land in order to enable those communities to meet their food needs in the very short term, and also in the medium term, their nutrition requirements. Because as we know, one meal a day, this is not going to be in the medium term, and it will continue to create inequalities and strife even amongst the displaced persons and their host communities, further exacerbating the tensions therein. So over to you, Masimba.
Thank you. The next question I have is from Warren Thompson of the Business Day. Could you give us an overview of the numbers? How many people have been displaced and require humanitarian aid? And given the deteriorating security situation, how many more do you expect to provide relief to this year? I think this question is for UNHCR. Thank you.
Yeah, here also, what we have when we were there was more or less 535,000. We had two numbers, one for the UN and one for the government, but since IOM is the one that is registering IDPs and so forth, I may refer the question to Charles, the new figures and so forth, because we have been there for like now 3 weeks. I am quite sure that things are not static, things are moving. Like I said during my intervention, every day people are moving out. So maybe the number now is more than the 535,000. Charles, please.
Thank you very much, Valentin. Indeed, IOM has been undertaking the displacement tracking matrix to provide the figures for planning and budgeting purposes and for the delivery of humanitarian assistance with the entire UN team. But as we all know, the ID figures keep fluctuating. Whenever there is an attack, we expect that the figures will vary. We only visited only a few limited areas, but as of now, limited figures is over 500,000. But this keeps fluctuating, and that is why the team requested from the Secretary of State and from the governor to allow for the registration of the IDPs to ensure that no one is left behind. And in that regard, it can provide figures for the women, the girls, the boys, to facilitate education, nutrition, health services. So indeed, the figures will vary as it usually does, because whenever people are displaced, the numbers are bound to change. But we'll continue to work together as a team to provide the figures as they arise to guide the support that the UN is able to provide to the IDPs and the host communities. Over.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Kali Ahmed of The Guardian. And this question is directed to WFP. How much access have you had to the affected populations in Cabo Delgado? Are you able to reach everyone, or have there been challenges? And also, what specific problems do you think the rains will bring? Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Camille. And it is very important to have a historical perspective. In 2017, when we as humanitarian actors and international community were asked to support the initial displacement, we had access to the whole province, 100%, except maybe some villages that were locked in and out when the security didn't allow. At this moment, at the end of 2020, the situation has changed, and the access due to security for our personnel, for the beneficiaries, and for the NGOs and civil society with whom we work is basically much more limited, mostly to the western districts and southern districts of Cabo Delgado. And we have an area that is in the coastal area of Cabo Delgado going south of Palma into Masimba and down almost to the Bay of Pemba City, where the access is limited at this moment. However, what we have been doing as international community is accessing the populations that have been displaced outside of that area where we have not had the access due to security reasons mostly. So in this moment, as our colleagues Charles and Valentin have said, we're looking at a total population of around 500,000 that is displaced, and we have been supporting at the largest month that we have support with several sectors around 400,000. Now the rains are very critical. Cabo Delgado during the rains becomes almost many of the districts on the north, central, and south become in lockdown because of the roads are become impassable. The rivers take down bridges. We saw also, as it was mentioned before, during the Kenneth in 2019, how this situation was even exacerbated with many of the facilities and infrastructures destroyed, and the lack of access was there. What we do as international community, as you know, is we put means to really overcome that. And we have at this moment some air assets in the province to be able to move to do assessments, to provide support to the communities that are isolated or cannot be reached by road. Then also we are using boats to access the coastal areas and to be able to go to different places, islands and coastal areas that are still accessible. So basically that's the situation, and it's very, very important, obviously, that we have access to the majority of the displaced, and we can not only provide the humanitarian support, but as it was said, to really try to support them in reestablishing their livelihoods so that the situation doesn't deteriorate further as the months go by. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Emma Rumley from Reuters, and it's directed to Ms. Meta Kulat. Here's the question. Is the number of displaced still growing as rapidly as it was last year? Approximately how many arrivals are there each day in Pemba, and how do most people get there? Second question is, do you have any sense of the situation further north, and to what degree whole territories or towns are actually under the insurgents' control? Is a place like Mozambique deprived, for instance? Is there, in a place like Mozambique deprived, for instance, is there an active occupation by insurgents in the town, or more of a no man's land where neither the government nor the insurgents have an established presence? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, and let me use the opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Mirta Kaulard, and I am the resident coordinator for the United Nations in Mozambique, and I am as well the humanitarian coordinator. What we have seen in terms of evolution in the number of people displaced is really a skyrocketing. We started the year with 90,000 people, and then especially in the second half of the year, the number has increased very, very fast. We moved to now more than 560,000 internally displaced. So the overall humanitarian appeal that we launched at the end of December together with the regional directors during their missions and together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mozambique is aiming at supporting 1.1 million people. We reckon that there are 1.6 million people in need, and 1.1 million people is those that we can reach with the humanitarian appeal. These are roughly half internally displaced and half host communities, because also the host communities are really heavily affected by what is going on. These are the poorest communities, amongst the poorest communities in the world, and they are having an demonstrating enormous generosity to host the internally displaced. But of course, even their very few capacity, very small capacity is very much stretched, and they are really sharing everything from the food to the land to the water to the health services. So this is why we have this priority. The numbers also of people affected are evolving as a situation evolved, and it's not just the security situation, but it is also the climate. We are now in the rain and the cyclonic season, and the floods are coming up, are normal during this period, but they are a threat to internally displaced. Often internally displaced are settled temporarily. They come and spontaneously settle in the poorest areas of towns. So this is why the authorities have a plan to move populations as soon as possible to new areas that are safer and where they can be more self-reliant. But the rains bring in new needs. We have now a cholera epidemic in Cabo Delgado, and that is affecting host populations, and we are struggling to contain it. The number of internally displaced over the last month has also increased because people knowing about the rains coming know that some areas will be cut off and areas where they can to economic activities. So the numbers are evolving, are very dynamic, but the needs are really there and are very important. This is why we are extremely worried also by the lack of resources that we have at present. We launched an appeal, it's $250 million, but we have very little resources at present. So our capacity to also help and to help these host communities and the internally displaced communities is extremely limited. And this is why we're very happy also to have had this mission and this this meeting now with you, because we really need all of the support to highlight the suffering of the people, but also how important it is to act to prevent a further deterioration of the situation. If populations are not assisted, there will be tensions, and tensions will increase then the numbers of people in need, and will continue to provoke the problems. What we receive from reports from the affected communities, those that have fled, for instance, Masimba Praia, is reports of brutality, is really reports of kidnappings, beheadings. It's terrible. People are often so traumatized that they don't manage to talk. They cry. We see adults crying for the brutalities that they have been victims and witnessing. The level of trauma amongst women is very, very, very strong. So these are the reports that we are getting. The situation is extremely dynamic, but it is a situation where we continue also to hear that people still try and continue to harvest when they come. So when they can. So it is a situation of fluid movement with the affected areas where we cannot access yet because mainly of the insecurity, and also again because of the lack of resources. It's just recently that we could have sufficient resources for a humanitarian air service, and we need more and more of that also to be able to expand access to these very difficult to reach areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is also directed for you, Mrs. Resident Coordinator. Ibrahimo Abu Baraku, a radio journalist, has been missing since April 7th, 2020. Did you have an opportunity to investigate circumstances of his disappearance?
As United Nations, we absolutely condemned any violence on journalists and on media. We are helping with the investigations, and we are extremely worried about the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question I have is directed to UNFPA. In your conversation with, it's from Johannes Dietrich of the German newspapers. In your conversations with the local community in Mozambique, did you experience sympathy with the insurgents as well? If so, in which context?
Yes, good morning. This is Andrea Wona. I'm the United Nations Fund for Population representative here in Mozambique. We have not encountered conversations with terrorists in our dealings with those that we are assisting. We have only encountered people who have fled, who are in desperate need, and in particular, pregnant women, young girls who are absolutely at risk of early marriage, early pregnancy, and sexually transmitted diseases, and increased gender-based violence due to COVID, which we know is a worldwide phenomenon, and due to their extremely vulnerable situations. Over.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Govan Whitrules of the ENCA News. Any evidence that insurgents continue to take over communities, or are they contained? Have you heard any reports from displaced people that the insurgents are forcing people to join their insurgency? Maybe the resident coordinator could respond to this.
Mirta, you are muted. You are muted, Mirta.
Sorry, please excuse me. This is what I was indicating earlier as well. We have very traumatic reports of from the internally displaced. They do say that relatives have been taken and they don't know about their whereabouts. This is a quite frequent report, but there is not much more that that we're being told. This is really it's constant, but this is the main message that we receive.
Thank you very much. The next question is directed either to IFAD or UNHCR. It's from Matt Hill of the Bloomberg News in South Africa. Why can't displaced people return currently? When might they be able to return? What needs to be done to allow IDPs to return in the near term?
Okay, no, thank you, Masimba. And thanks for the question. You know, people don't want to move their place of residence, place of origins, if there is no dramatic issues and so forth. They are not moving, they didn't flee because they want to flee. They fled because they were forced to flee, massacre, human rights abuses, and so forth. So asking them to go back, I think Mirta just said that people are traumatized and so forth. When you are talking to them, adults are crying and so forth. So in order for them to go back in dignity and safety, they need the conditions in their place of origin have to be improved, have to come back to normal. And saying normal is that you don't have any jihadists, you don't have any non-state actors and so forth being there traumatizing the population and so forth. When these conditions are met, it is clear that these people would like to go back to their place of origin. But right now, we are not definitely looking into that because the place is not safe and we cannot ask people to go back and get killed or get harmed into harm ways. Over to you, Masimba.
Masimba, I would just like to compliment what has been said by Valentin, in the sense that indeed, in order to also encourage displaced persons to go back, there has to be conditions in the origin and in the villages where they're coming from of stability, some peace and resources there to rebuild their lives. Most likely with the insurgents, their homes have been destroyed, their crops have been stolen, livestock has been stolen as well. So if they do not have these starter kits to enable them to really rebuild and reestablish themselves, and we're really talking about the full breadth of those types of kits. Normally we look to see small stock which are able to quickly replicate themselves so they can have something to eat, the seeds, and even other types of solar types of kits that could really enable them to have the basic minimum energy for fuel, cooking, and so on to reestablish their lives. So if they're enabled to have that, this would also be a form of, let's say, incentive and a facility that could help them transition out of camps, out of the host communities, and move forward. And also for host communities, of course, there has to be that recognition and inclusion of their efforts to host in a very warm and caring way and share the little resource they have. And so, additional resources are needed to also help them weather through and spreading their resources so thin and sharing them throughout. So I think with these types of tools and equipments and resources in place, that will enable them, including the peace and security they need, to go back to their home villages. Thank you, Masimba.
Thank you very much. I think our last question is from Oni News for UNFPA. Women, girls, and young people are at-risk groups. What is the priority for these target groups? Do you have statistical data to share? What are the agents' challenges taking into account the communities, traditions, and customs? Over to you, UNFPA.
Yes, thank you again. I would just like to repeat that we have women, girls, and young people displaced. Over 127,000 are women of reproductive age. Remember, we're dealing with a very young population. Over 60% of the population of Mozambique is under 25 years old. I don't know if you can even try to imagine. So of those 127,000 women, we have more than 1,600 expected to deliver this month. And those women do not have access to proper facilities. As the security worsens, families are struggling to cope. And I know your question asked about cultural traditions. There is a high value to fertility and to large families, which of course we're working with on a longer term basis. But I personally met families when I traveled with the regional directors who said, no, we cannot afford to have any more children right now. We do not want any more mouths to feed. We are struggling day by day. So they themselves are asking for this kind of support. But given the challenges we have and given the risks of maternal mortality and morbidity, we have estimated that one woman every 4 days risks her life giving birth over the next year if we don't get immediate assistance. Over.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the Q&A. We will now have closing remarks from the resident coordinator of the UN in Mozambique, Ms. Meta Coolidge, who you have heard from. She assumed their duties in July 2019. Prior to this, she was the representative and country director of the World Food Programme in Nigeria. Her first assignment as UN resident coordinator was in Cuba, where she was also a UNDP resident representative. In total, Ms. Coulard has been with the UN for 28 years, mostly with WFP. Among other academic achievements, Ms. Coulard has a master's degree in international affairs from the International University of Japan and a diploma from the Johns Hopkins University. The floor is now yours, resident coordinator.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the to the mission for coming, and to all those who attended in this press conference. It's really important to bring visibility to Cabo Delgado, to bring Cabo Delgado in the north of Mozambique in really much higher up in the international attention. The time now is a time for scale and for urgent response. And it is a time for scale and urgent response in the humanitarian part, but also in the resilience recovery part of the needs and of the challenge too. We, as you heard, we're talking about people who for quite some time will not be able to return back to their family, to their area, hosting large number, many families have. This situation is not sustainable. This is a situation risk to be an additional complicating factor that can cause further humanitarian needs. It is totally urgent to respond to the humanitarian appeal of the United Nations and bring resources to help communities and to help a Mozambican response to the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Resident Coordinator. We have now come to the end of our press conference, and I would like to thank the Resident Coordinator, regional directors, members of the media, and other members of the UN family, as well as my colleagues who organized this press conference. As we have heard from our speakers, the humanitarian situation in Cabo Delgado is dire. We need to move fast and act now before it deteriorates further and endanger the lives and livelihoods of thousands of more civilians, particularly women and children. We depend on you, members of the media, to raise the necessary alarm bells. A humanitarian crisis from security threats in Mozambique is a threat to all countries in the region. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all the best. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. And for journalists who need to pursue questions or interviews with our regional directors and the resident coordinator, the contact details of their communications people in the press release or the statement. Thank you very much. Stay safe and well. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you to all.
Audrey.
Shelley, do you want us to disconnect? Is that the... Do we all just leave the meeting now? Is that what we do?